am Gareth Davis. I am, trying to think of my title now, Children, Family, Community, Curry Organiser, Film Organiser. I do all the children's and families and community. Well, I help with the community work here at St John's. And I am Welsh. Now, I've always kept that a secret, actually. I've not really mentioned it. I don't like to dwell on it, but I am Welsh. And for the last week, I've been in Swansea. Well, not the last week, last couple of days. I've been in Swansea, and I love going to Swansea with the beaches and the gower and all that kind of thing. And I went to visit my mum. Okay, now my mum is 78 tomorrow, still working as a barmaid at a social club in Swansea. She's incredible. And she is bonkers, right? She's absolutely bonkers. But I don't mean that in a kind of critical way or mocking way. She's bonkers in a good way, right? She's sort of like at an age now where she's been through her life and things have happened, and she's quite a strong woman because of that. And she's at an age as well where, and I don't know if you can relate to this, as you get older, you sort of care less, don't you? So now she's 78, she doesn't care about anything anymore. And so she's kind of bonkers, but in a good way. And as an example of this, once, a few months ago, well, probably a bit more than that, I went to visit her, okay? And she lives at the end of this road, and at the other end of the road is the social club she works in. And so she has to walk up this road to get to work, okay? And it's quite a lived-in area, let's call it that. It's a bit ropey, right? And when I go and visit, I always make a point of walking her up to work, and then at the end of the night, about 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night, walking her back. All right, I try and do that as the dutiful son. And one day, I was walking her back, and it was quite dark. This was the time where the council had no money, so they were shutting off the street lights about 10 o'clock. So it was about 11:30. It was quite dark, and I was walking her back, and I said to my mum, you know what, ma'am, as I call her, one day you want to be careful, because one day someone's going to come up to you and see you as a vulnerable person in the dark, in the middle of the night, and something's going to happen to you. And she went to me, no, it won't, because I've got my weapon with me, haven't I? And I was like, right, okay, what's this weapon? And she held up her umbrella, right? And she went, if anyone comes near me, I'm going to smack them over the head with this umbrella, right? And I said, well, if the person, if the thing that's attacking you is the weather, that's fine, isn't it? But if it's someone with a weapon, an actual weapon, not an umbrella, you're in trouble. Well, as true as I stand here now, a few months later, it was about 11:30, she was walking back from work, and this guy came up to her with a knife, right, and said, give me your bag, right? This happened a few months later, as I warned her. Yeah, I was right. And two things happened. The first thing that happened was she said the most unbelievably foul thing to him, right, in response to this request. Something if I repeated it now, I'd probably never work in ministry again, I'd imagine. And in your head, if you're thinking, I know the kind of thing she probably said to him, you couldn't be further away from what she said to him. It was unbelievably awful, right? So that happened. And then, fast forward sort of 2-3 minutes later, the guy who was holding a knife to my mum was running down the road, right? And my mum was chasing him with her umbrella, smacking him over the head. And that taught him a lesson, didn't it? I have to say, when me, my brother, and my sister sent her flowers afterwards, because obviously it's not funny being mugged, and we said on the little note, we said two things. Firstly, if anyone does that again, give him your bag. And secondly, we're really proud of you, well done. And that's my mum. And my mum's an example of someone who, when you look at her, you can see how the pottery wheel of life has molded her into the way she is today. How life has changed her into the strong, independent, feisty woman she's become. And as we look at people and we think about how we see people develop and grow in life, on a human level, there's two things we see. Firstly, we see in a physical sense how people grow, don't we? We see the aging process, the effects of stressfulness maybe on people. We see in a physical way how people develop in life. The second thing, and this definitely applies to my mum, is we see their character change. They might become sort of warped by life. They might become stronger by life. They change whatever. You see people change, and that's how you see them develop and how life molds them. But as you become a Christian, there's a third thing. There's a third thing you're aware of. And it's not just an additional thing. It's something that is probably the most important thing, and also the thing that God works through the most. And that's the heart, isn't it? As we become Christians, our heart changes. Our heart is meant to change. We need to work at that. We need to work at our heart changing. And this passage today from Colossians is full of stuff. It would be impossible to cover it all. So I want us to think about it as the heart. What does it say about our heart? And that's Paul's biggest concern, isn't it? Whenever he writes a letter, whoever he's writing to, it's the heart that is his concern, how people change and grow in their relationship with God. And why do we know that's so important to Paul? Not just what he writes, but also where he's come from. So Paul, in Acts 22, confesses that his old life was about torturing Christians, about killing Christians, about imprisoning Christians. So we know that Paul, who's gone through an incredible change of heart in his life, knows all about this and knows the importance of our hearts changing. So what does this passage tell us about our hearts and how they change? Well, firstly, in verse 1, he reminds us, doesn't he, that our identity is totally different. As we become followers of Jesus, we need to let go of our earthly character and go into our heavenly character. Also, that Jesus has become our identity. That we are people that see our identity through Jesus. Often when people talk about how Jesus connects us with God, they talk about a bridge, how Jesus has become a bridge between us and God, and that's true. But I like to think of it as a pair of sunglasses. Now let me explain this. If you are out and the sun's out, which it has been recently, you sort of can't look at it. It offends your eyes because it's so strong. If you try and look at the sun, it's incredibly uncomfortable. And when God sees us in our sinful way, without Jesus, that's how he sees us. He looks at us and he finds it incredibly uncomfortable because our sinfulness is what he sees. But if we look at the sun with sunglasses, we see the sun, but it's the filter we need to look at it. And with God, as he looks at us, Jesus is our filter. When God looks at us through the filter of Jesus, he's able to see us and to love us and to be near us again. And so, as we think about Jesus being our identity, that's the reason he is our identity, because he is the filter that connects us with God again. When God sees us, he sees the character of Jesus. So we therefore need to live our lives in a way which reflects the character of Jesus. Secondly, it tells us in this passage from verse 2 that we need to set our minds on the things above. So again, that reminds us, doesn't it, that our earthly life needs to change from that to a life where we're looking above. We're not looking at the earthly things that mold our life. We're looking at God. We're looking at the example of Jesus, and we're living our life like that. Let me just use a kind of example of that, because in the passage it tells us very clearly, doesn't it? He even separates it. Verses 5 to 10 are like, this is what your earthly life was like, and you need to leave behind. And 12 to 14, this is actually what your life needs to be like. There needs to be a total transformation in the way we live. Imagine a man and a wife get married, okay? They're quite old, so the wife, the woman, has bought this house over time and made it into her perfect home, okay? She's made it into something she treasures and loves. There's flowers everywhere. There's pink everywhere. There's little fluffy cushions everywhere. I'm not taking this from experience in any way, but that's what the house is like, okay? Then she meets this man. He's incredible. He's wonderful. He's brilliant. He's the kind of man that will take off a piece of clothing and put it straight in the laundry basket. That's the kind of man he is. He's wonderful. He's a great man. He will brush his teeth and not just put the toothpaste top back on. He'll put it in the holder it came from. He's brilliant. And she thinks, I'm so blessed to have met this man. He's wonderful. And when they're thinking about marriage, they're thinking about where they live afterwards, what the future will look like. And she's saying, well, I've got this wonderful house. Let's just live there. And he's like, well, I can't live there because it looks like a Barbie house, doesn't it? That's not really what I thought about for my future. And she thinks this. He's such a wonderful man. I'm so blessed to have him in my life. I'm going to promise him that over time, we will change this house. Room by room, we will change it. This is the sacrifice I'm going to make. Room by room, we're going to change it so it becomes a totally different house. That there's no sign of what it used to be like. It's a house we can both share together. And that's what God is asking of us. That's how we need to see God. We're so blessed to have God in our lives. We're so blessed that God's done this for us, that we will take our lives and we will flip it on its head, and we will change it into a totally different life that is pleasing to him. That we will do that for him because we love him so much. And of course, the danger is, as the woman's sort of going through her house and changing it in each room, they're making it into a totally different room, she starts thinking, actually, some flowers and some pink and some cushions with fluffy bits would look nice in here. That's always the temptation, isn't it? But she keeps on saying to herself, no, this is a house I promised will change. It will be totally different. And in our lives, as we try and change our hearts, just like that house needs to be changed, there are times where we sort of pull back. We go, actually, I like money. I'm going to try and earn as much money as I can. Or I deserve to be angry at that driver who's just cut me up on the road. That I deserve to do that. I deserve to beat my horn at him. But what we need to do is what that woman does. We need to keep on saying to ourselves, our hearts need to change. My heart needs to change. I need to protect that and continue to grow so my heart becomes something totally different that reflects the character of Jesus, not my earthly character instead. And as we do this, we know, don't we, that our lives can't necessarily be the total opposite because we need to dwell in the world. And Paul, after this passage, goes on to say how we can practically live in the world with this as his template. But even though our lives can't change fully to the point where we disengage with everything, our hearts have to. Our hearts have to be totally different to the earthly life we used to live. So as we think about this, as we think about the need to see our identity in Jesus, the need to change our hearts completely so they're not earthly anymore, but we're looking upwards, what is the encouragement that Paul gives to us? Because Paul, when he writes a letter, is firm and clear and non-compromising, but he's also encouraging. Because the people he's writing to are real people. And he knows that this will be a challenge and will be incredibly hard. So what does he say to encourage them? Well, I think what he's saying, as we get to the end of the passage, is you have the blessing of unity. As you go through this change, as you become people whose hearts need to change, you do it as a Christian community. You do it as a Christian body. And as you come together and you worship and you work together and you live together and you're unified, that's the blessing. The reason I chose Psalm 100 is it reminds us of the blessing of being unified as a church body. And as we come to the end of the passage, we see that Paul reminds us of this. You're not alone, you have each other. But what is the other unity that is draped all the way through the passage? Well, in verses 1, 3, 4, 10, 11, 13, 15, 16, and 17, there is a mention of Jesus or Christ. There's a mention of him. And that's a reminder that the biggest unity we have is with Jesus. As we try and change our hearts, Jesus is at the core of what we're doing. We're not alone, not just because we have each other, but we have Jesus who loves and cares for us. And he's not just died on the cross and risen again to represent not just a new life for him, but a new life for us. And that's where our identity lies. But he's with us now to help us in this journey to become changed people. The last thing I'd say this morning is this. As we look at this, as we look at the identity we have through Jesus, as we look at our hearts changing because of Jesus, as we think about the unity we have with each other, but with Jesus. This is what we know, but it's not exclusive, it's inclusive. So if you look at verse 11, the basic message of verse 11 is, Jesus is for everyone. Jesus is for everyone. At the time, there was so much division about what people believed, whether they were circumcised, whether they weren't circumcised, whether they were slaves, whether they weren't slaves. Jesus is saying through this, through Paul, that this message is for everyone. It's all inclusive. But he's not just saying that. He's basically saying as well, we need to treat the way we live our faith like that by letting people know this wonderful message. Don't forget, we're in the shadow of the Great Commission, where Jesus said to go and spread the word. As we get to Colossians 4, we see how Paul specifies that he needs prayer to spread the good news to other people. So we are people that could have a danger of living exclusively, but we need to live inclusively, if that's a word. We need to think of others. We're all right. We know the message. We know the good news. We know the need to look upwards, but we need to spread that message to other people as well. That would have been such a challenge at the time. There were people that were seen as sort of barbarians at the time that didn't speak Greek. And so because of that, they were seen as thick and uneducated. People wouldn't for a second think that God would want anything to do with them. But the real truth coming through this, and verse 11 especially, is the message of Jesus is for everyone. As I think about my mum, as I think about my family, my friends, I do worry about their welfare. I do worry about my mum walking in the dark and that kind of thing. But it's not their welfare that's my biggest concern. It's their heart that's my biggest concern. My friends, the people I see every day, they're my concern because their hearts are my concern. The people I meet in a shop as I'm passing them should be my concern because their hearts should be my concern. The message of Jesus is for everyone. And that's how we need to live. We need to live as people that don't just look after our hearts, but we need to spread the word to look after the hearts of others as well. I heard someone once say there are two things we need to think of when we look at someone else, however well or unwell we know them. We need to think about how we can best spread the gospel, and then when that's done, we need to think best about how we can help them to look upwards. And as we do that, as our hearts prepare to look upwards and not at earthly things, we need to think best about how we can help others to do the same as well. Let's pray. Father God, thank you so much for this amazing passage. It's so hard to, in sort of 20 minutes, to summarize everything that this passage brings to us. But one of the key themes going through it is about the heart, about the need to change. I was thinking this morning Nigel spoke about Matthew, how when Jesus challenged Matthew to follow him, he did. He left his job, everything he knew, the money that he'd taken off people, the way he'd been corrupt in the way of doing that, the way he loved money. But when Jesus challenged him to follow him, Matthew went and followed him. I just pray that as we think about ourselves, we'll be people that leave our earthly lives behind. We'll be people that are totally committed to changing our hearts. And as we do that, I just pray that verse 11 won't just be a context verse about the time, but it'll be a challenge for us to remember that this message of living in the identity of Jesus will be one that helps us to tell other people the good news. Just as Paul in prison wanted other people to know about you. I just pray that we will be people that spread the good news. And not just that, but help people to look upwards, away from their earthly lives and towards you. Amen.